My name is Joanna Hartley. I'm 47 years old, and the morning my son stood up in front of 23 people and erased me. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I handed him a pen. We were at Riverside Country Club, the kind of place that smells like old money and fresh-cut grass. White tablecloths, polished silver, a view of the golf course rolling out under a spotless Arizona sky. The kind of place my ex-husband Nicholas always loved. Brunch for family and close friends, the invitation had said. What it meant was, watch Nicholas and his shiny new wife, Grace Harrison, perform their perfect blended family for an audience. I sat at the far end of the table, nursing lukewarm coffee and pretending to be invisible. It wasn't hard. Grace glowed at the other end. Designer dress, blowout hair, that easy, practiced laugh of a woman who spends a lot of time pitching investors. Nicholas sat beside her, hand on her chair, like she was the prize he'd won for surviving our divorce. My son, Brandon, was pressed between them, wrapped in a suit jacket that cost more than my first car. He used to sit next to me at meals. He used to lean his head on my shoulder when he was tired. Now, he didn't even look in my direction. Grace lifted her champagne glass and tapped it lightly with her fork. The chatter around us dimmed, forks pausing over eggs Benedict and fruit salad. I just want to say, she began, voice bright with performance, how grateful I am for all of you, for family, for how beautifully we've come together these last couple of years. I'd heard that tone 1,000 times. It was the same one I used in boardrooms when I needed to sell a deal I wasn't sure about. Nick's company is thriving, she went on. That was generous. My last peek at his LinkedIn had screamed midlife reinvention more than thriving. My startup just secured another round of funding, and this... She squeezed Brandon's shoulder. This young man has been growing into himself in a way that makes us both so proud. Us both. I kept my face blank, hands folded in my lap. I run Hartley Industrial Supply. 3 warehouses, 47 employees, contracts across 4 states. We sell welding equipment and industrial safety gear to people who actually build things. It isn't glamorous, but it's solid. It feeds families. It built the life Nicholas and I used to share. It also built something else, the Hartley Family Trust. But nobody at this table cared about that right now. They just saw a woman in a simple blouse and jeans, no flashy jewelry, sitting alone at the end while her son leaned toward another woman who wasn't his mother. Grace smiled, wide and camera-ready. Brandon and Nick have been talking a lot about legacy, about what names mean, and what kind of future he wants to build. I felt the first cold drop in my stomach. Here it is, I thought. Brandon? Grace nudged him gently. You wanted to say something? He stood, clearing his throat. The whole table turned toward him. He looked down the line of white plates and sweating champagne flutes, all the way to me, and then past me. Almost like I was a wall instead of a person. I've been thinking a lot, he began. His voice shook, but he pushed through it. About who I want to be, and what kind of future I want. The Hartley name. He paused, just long enough that I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. Doesn't really fit who I am anymore. It was oddly quiet. Even the clink of cutlery stopped. Someone shifted in their seat. A chair creaked. My dad. He pointed slightly toward Nicholas, then corrected himself. Nicholas runs a business that's stuck in old-school manufacturing. Mom runs the same kind of thing. That's fine for them. A murmur quickly swallowed. But Grace and the Harrison family? That's the future I want to be part of. Tech, innovation, real success. He glanced at Grace. She beamed, like she was on stage. So, Brandon said, louder now, I don't want the Hartley name anymore. I'm going to change my last name to Harrison, officially. He swallowed. From now on, I want to be Brandon Harrison. Someone at the table let out a soft, shocked laugh. Another person whispered, Wow. Across from him, Nicholas smiled proudly. Grace's fingers tightened on his shoulder. I stared at my son, my only child, and for a heartbeat, all I saw was a sweaty little boy at 6 years old in a too big t-shirt, proudly handing me a crayon drawing of a stick figure family with Ma-em written over the biggest one. Now he was 17, dressed in a blazer Grace probably picked out, publicly renouncing me like I was an old brand he'd outgrown. My chest hurt, not sharply, more like a slow crushing, like someone had set a cinder block on my ribs and walked away. Brandon, someone near him said, one of Grace's relatives, I think. That's a big step. Grace lifted her glass. To Brandon Harrison, she declared, voice ringing. To the future he deserves. Several people followed her lead. Champagne glasses lifted. A few phones angled just so. capturing their perfect cinematic moment. I did not stand. I did not argue, because I had seen this coming. For 2 years, I'd watched my son drift away inch by inch, like a boat pulled by a current he didn't even know he was in. First it was the clothes, then the haircut, then the insults about people who work with their hands, then the canceled weekends, and then that parent-teacher conference when he'd called Grace his real mom while I sat there breathing through my teeth. 2 days after that, I'd called William Patterson, our family lawyer, from my truck in the school parking lot. And 3 weeks after that, I started carrying an envelope in my jacket, the one that was currently pressing against my ribs. The table was waiting for me to react. Nicholas met my eyes, smug and wary all at once. He'd lost the trust in the divorce. His lawyer had fought like hell for it and failed. He knew the Hartley name meant money, power, security, just not for him. Maybe he thought this was revenge. Maybe he thought watching our son throw my name away would finally break me. I stood up slowly. My chair scraped against the stone patio. "Joanna," one of Nicholas's sisters said. Her tone said, "Don't make a scene." I smoothed my jacket, feeling the crisp corners of the envelope. Brandon didn't sit down. He stared at me with that new, brittle arrogance he'd picked up from Grace's circle, like he was braced for me to start sobbing or begging. Instead, I walked the length of the table. Every step felt weirdly distant, like I was watching myself move through water. Conversation stilled. Grace's hand on Brandon's shoulder went still, her manicured nails pressing faint half-moons into his jacket. I stopped in front of my son. Up close, he still had a tiny scar on his chin from when he'd fallen off his bike at 8 years old, and I'd driven him to the ER with shaking hands. I wondered if Grace knew that story. I set the envelope down in front of him. The white paper looked almost too bright against the linen. "What's that?" he asked. "My only contribution to your big announcement," I said. My voice was eerily calm. "If you're serious about changing your name, we should make it official." He frowned. "What?" I took out the stack of documents and laid them flat. The top page bore neat black letters. Declaration of name change and renunciation of the Hartley family name. A few people leaned in to read. "It's a legal name change petition," I explained, loud enough for the entire table to hear. My pulse hammered, but my words didn't shake. "And a formal renunciation of the Hartley family name. You sign, we file, and you can start being Brandon Harrison for real." Brandon's eyes flickered over the heading, then snapped back to my face. "You already had this?" "I told you," I said quietly. "I've been watching this coming for a while." Nicholas's jaw clenched. "Joanna, this is unnecessary." Grace's smile tightened, edges cracking. "You didn't have to bring legal drama into a brunch, Joe." I ignored both of them. "Brandon," I said, looking only at my son now, "if you're just performing, for them, for social media, for some idea of yourself, now's the time to stop." A few phones lowered, awkwardly. "But if you really don't want to be a Hartley anymore," I nudged the pen toward him, its metal barrel softly ticking against the glass. "Then sign." He swallowed. For a heartbeat, something uncertain flickered in his eyes. "This is just a name change form?" he asked. "It's a legal document," I replied. "It has consequences. You should read it carefully before you sign anything." That last sentence felt like acid in my mouth. I'd told him the same thing since he was 12. Contracts, forms, agreements, always read everything before you sign. Brandon looked down at the pages. They were dense, yes. Legal language. References to petitions, declarations, voluntary renunciation. On page 1, near the middle, a line that mattered more than he understood, acknowledging the permanent nature of this decision. He skimmed the first few lines. I watched his eyes barely move before snapping back up. "You're just trying to scare me," he said, too loud. There was a flush creeping up his neck. "I know what I want." "Then read it," I repeated calmly. "If you're sure, reading it won't change anything." At the far end of the table, someone coughed. The server froze near the kitchen doors, holding a tray of mimosas hostage in midair. Brandon's jaw tightened. He grabbed the pen like it had insulted him personally. He didn't read another word. His signature sliced across the bottom of the page with all the reckless certainty of a teenager who thinks the worst thing that can happen is a grounding. "Yeah." He shoved the pen down, the click echoing louder in my head than the murmurs around us. "There," he said. "Done. I'm not a Hartley anymore." A piece of me tore right down the middle. But underneath the hurt, under the humiliation, there was something else. A cold, clear line. "You made your choice." I gathered the papers, stacked them neatly, slid them back into the envelope. My fingers moved automatically. My heart felt like it was 3 seconds behind. Nicholas was watching me like he'd finally won. Grace's expression had shifted from smug to slightly wary, like she was only now realizing there might be more to this than a dramatic brunch moment. I lifted my orange juice. I'd driven myself here, no champagne, and raised it slightly. "To Brandon," I said, my voice carried all the way down the table. "May you get exactly what you just asked for." The words hung there, heavier than the cut crystal in my hand. A few people muttered a half-hearted cheers. Others just stared. I turned, walked back to my seat, picked up my bag. Someone said my name. I didn't stop. The sun hit my face as I stepped off the patio. Too bright, too honest. In the parking lot, I slid behind the wheel of my truck. The envelope sat on the passenger seat, accusing and obedient all at once. For a long moment, I just gripped the steering wheel and let myself feel it. The burn behind my eyes, the hollow in my chest, the sound of Brandon's voice echoing. I don't want the Hartley name anymore. Then I took a breath, started the engine, and pulled out of the lot. I didn't go home. I drove straight to William Patterson's office, the envelope riding shotgun. By the time I walked through his door, the shock had settled into something colder. "Resolve." "Joanna," William said, standing from behind his desk, eyebrows lifting when he saw the envelope. "He actually did it?" "In front of 23 witnesses," I replied, setting the papers in front of him. "Some of them filming. You've got your signature." He opened the envelope, scanned the top page, and let out a slow exhale. "All right," he said quietly. "Then today is the day Clause 14.7 wakes up." Brandon thought he'd only signed away a last name. He had no idea what else he'd just killed with the stroke of a pen. When I was 28, the idea of my son standing up in a room full of people and disowning me would have sounded like a bad joke. Back then, Nicholas was still the man who made me laugh too loud in hotel kitchens. We met at an industry mixer downtown, one of those networking events with name tags, lukewarm appetizers, and people trying too hard to impress clients they secretly despised. I was there representing Hartley Industrial Supply, a third-generation family business that sold welding equipment, safety gear, and heavy machinery parts. Not glamorous, not disruptive, but profitable, solid, real. Nicholas was there working for the hotel chain that hosted the event, charming sponsors and making sure nothing fell apart. He wasn't especially tall or striking, but he had that kind of easy charisma people mistake for leadership. He remembered names, told harmless jokes, made everyone feel briefly like they were the most important person in the room. I was at the bar, sipping flat soda water and pretending to check emails when he appeared at my elbow, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up. "You look like you're trying to merge with the wallpaper," he said. "Is it that bad?" "It's fine," I replied. "I just prefer when the equipment is louder than the people." He laughed. "So you're the welding person?" "That's me, Joanna Hartley, Industrial Supply." He stuck out his hand. "Nicholas Hartley, hotel event guy." Then he grinned. "I think that makes me hospitality and you heavy machinery. We cover both sides of the economy." It was a stupid line. I smiled anyway. We started dating. 2 years later, we were married. For a while, it felt like we'd cracked some secret code. We bought a 4-bedroom house in a good neighborhood with a pool in the backyard and a kitchen. Nicholas insisted we'd actually use for dinner parties we almost never held. I was working more and more at the company, moving from operations to managing big accounts. He shifted into sales for a different hospitality group, better hours, more money. At 31, I had Brandon. I remember the first time they placed him on my chest, warm and squirming and furious at the bright lights. Nicholas cried harder than I did. "He's perfect," he whispered. "He's a Hartley." There was a weight to that word even then. The Hartley name isn't just something stitched on polo shirts or engraved on golf clubs. My grandfather, Samuel, started the business in 1967 with a tiny shop and a handful of clients. My father nearly killed himself growing it. By the time I was old enough to understand anything beyond, "Don't touch that, it's sharp," the company was the gravitational center of our lives. When I turned 25, my parents sat me down at the dining room table with a thick stack of papers. "This," my father said, tapping the top page, "is the Hartley Family Trust. If you're going to inherit this business one day, you're going to understand exactly what that means." He made me read every single word, page after page of dense legal language. Assets, distributions, conditions, commercial real estate, investment accounts, life insurance policies, controlling shares in Hartley Industrial Supply, protections against lawsuits, bankruptcies, vindictive ex-spouses, and then Any descendant who voluntarily renounces the Hartley family name through legal proceedings shall immediately and irrevocably forfeit all rights, privileges, and claims to the Hartley family trust and associated assets. Clause 14.7. At some point, my father said, watching me closely, one of our kids, or grandkids, is going to get involved with someone who thinks the name isn't enough. They'll want to rebrand the family, or walk away, or marry into some other legacy and take the easy path. This clause is for them. I remember scoffing. Who would ever give this up? He didn't smile. People are capable of stranger things than you think, Joe. What matters is that the trust survives them. 7 years later, a drunk driver blew through a red light on Highway 17 and killed both my parents in one night. I became the sole trustee of the Hartley Family Trust. Brandon was 10. At the funeral, he clung to my hand and asked, "Does this mean you're the boss now?" "It means," I said, glancing at the casket like it was a door slammed shut, "that I have a lot of responsibilities, and that someday, if you want it, you will too." He'd grinned. "I want it. I want to be the boss." I used to replay that moment in my head when he was little. The way his eyes lit up when he sat on the forklift in the warehouse, the way he asked questions about machines and safety protocols. He'd walk between rows of shelves stacked with steel and copper and say, "This is all ours?" "Ours, not mine." Back then, Nicholas liked to brag about it. "My wife runs a multi-million-dollar operation," he'd say at parties. "Our kids set for life." But over time, the way he said our started to sound more like her. The first cracks in our marriage weren't dramatic. They were small, hairline fractures. "I feel like I never see you anymore," Nicholas said one night while I was on my laptop at the kitchen table, going over quarterly numbers. The dishwasher hummed in the background. Brandon's school backpack lay open on a chair. "You're at the warehouse, or in meetings, or answering emails. When do you turn it off?" "When things stop breaking," I muttered, scanning a line item. "We just landed that mining contract in Nevada. It's a big deal. I can't screw it up." He sighed loudly. "I'm not asking you to screw anything up. I'm asking you to be present. Sometimes I feel like you're married to the company and I'm, what, your roommate with benefits?" I closed the laptop. The numbers could wait an hour. We talked, we compromised. We promised to schedule more date nights, to unplug on weekends. And for a while it worked, or seemed to. But success doesn't come with an off switch, and neither do supply chain issues or urgent client calls. When Brandon was born, Hartley Industrial Supply was pulling in about $8 million annually. By the time he hit middle school, we were at 12. That growth didn't happen because I wished for it. It happened because I worked. Nicholas started making little comments. "Must be nice being so important they can't survive without you. Maybe if you weren't so obsessed with welding equipment, you'd have energy left for us. Your father was the same way, you know. Maybe being emotionally unavailable runs in the family." The irony, of course, is that his own ego was quietly packing a suitcase and heading elsewhere. I found out about Grace on a Tuesday afternoon. I'd finished a site visit early and decided to come home instead of going back to the office. When I turned onto our street, I saw it immediately. A sleek electric SUV parked in our driveway. New, expensive, the kind of car you don't buy if you're worried about practical things like longevity or maintenance. Nicholas hadn't mentioned guests. I went inside through the garage the way I always did. The house was quiet. Brandon was still at school. There were 2 half-empty wine glasses on the kitchen counter. I remember thinking, no, he wouldn't. And then I heard it, the unmistakable low murmur of voices, a woman's laugh, polished and bright and utterly at home. In my bedroom. I opened the door, and there they were. Nicholas, shirt halfway unbuttoned. Grace, hair spilling over my pillow like she owned the place. They froze. For a second, nobody moved. Then Grace did something I'll never forget. She smiled at me. Not apologetically, not even awkwardly, just assessed me. From my steel-toed boots to the company logo on my shirt. Then she looked at Nicholas and said lightly, "Guess the meeting's over." I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I walked out, closed the door, and called my lawyer from the hallway. The divorce took 9 months and cost me $85,000 in legal fees and more emotional energy than running 3 warehouses combined. Nicholas wanted half of everything. The house, full custody, support. He wanted to be rewarded for burning down our life. Grace was always there, in the lobby, in the hallway, in his car. She never spoke to me directly, but I could feel her watching, calculating. Their lawyer tried to make me the villain, the workaholic mother who cared more about heavy machinery than tuck-ins and PTA meetings. They painted Nicholas as the poor, neglected husband who had no choice but to seek affection somewhere else. My lawyer, bless him, politely took that narrative apart piece by piece. The trust, though, that was where the real war was. They wanted it counted as marital property, or at least considered in support calculations. They argued that because Brandon would one day benefit, Nicholas deserved a larger share now. William Patterson appeared in court like the ghost of my grandfather's decisions. The Hartley family trust predates this marriage by decades, he told the judge. It cannot be divided. It cannot be leveraged. It is separate, independent, and governed by its own internal clauses. Clauses such as, the judge asked? William tapped the folder. Such as 14.7, which states that any descendant who voluntarily renounces the Hartley name loses any claim to the trust, permanently. Nicholas didn't understand the significance of that line. Grace didn't either. They only heard, "You can't touch this money," and they hated it. In the end, the settlement was brutal but clear. Nicholas got the house. I let it go without much of a fight because I refused to uproot Brandon from his school and friends. We agreed to joint custody. Brandon with Nicholas during the week, with me on weekends and summers. I paid support, $4,200 a month, plus half of college expenses. I kept the company. I kept control of the trust. Walking out of that courtroom felt like leaving a limb behind. But for a little while, life settled into a new, uneasy normal. Brandon still came to my place on the weekends. We'd go to baseball games, grill in the backyard, work on an old Civic I'd bought at auction. "Someday this'll be yours," I told him, handing him a wrench. "Once you can tell me what every part under this hood does." He grinned and wiped sweat on his forearm. Deal. He still called me Mom. He still signed his homework, Brandon Hartley. If you'd told me then that one day he'd stand up at a country club and publicly throw that name away, I would have laughed. Or maybe I wouldn't have. Because the day Nicholas married Grace, something in Brandon's orbit shifted. And slowly, carefully, they started pulling him away from me. One haircut, one sneaker, one comment at a time. Grace Harrison did not steal my husband. She just made it very, very easy for him to leave. The first time I ever saw her, truly saw her, was during one of those awkward handoffs early in the separation, when Nicholas and I were still learning how to trade our son like a suitcase. The car door opened, and Brandon hopped out, wearing a brand new designer hoodie that definitely didn't exist in his closet the weekend before. Then Grace stepped out of the driver's seat, immaculate, even in casual clothes. Glossy hair, flawless skin, heels that had no business being worn to pick up a teenager from school. She extended a hand toward me, with a rehearsed warmth, like she was greeting a potential investor, instead of the woman whose husband she'd been sleeping with. "Joanna," she said brightly, "I've heard so much about you." I did not shake her hand. Behind her, Nicholas hovered with a strained smile, as if silently begging me not to cause a scene. Brandon stood between them, shifting awkwardly, unsure where to look. 3 silhouettes in a tableau I didn't belong to anymore. I shut the door without a word. That should have been the worst of it. But betrayals don't end at discovery. They ripple outward, contaminating everything they touch. Nicholas fell harder and faster than I expected. Grace's world intoxicated him. The sleek offices, the startup culture, the glossy promises of when we IPO, and when the market shifts, and when we disrupt the industry. And Grace made sure Brandon watched every moment of it. She understood branding better than any marketing veteran. And she knew exactly how to rebrand my son. At first, it was small. "Grace says people notice your haircut before your resume," Brandon said one weekend, running his fingers through a new, overly styled cut that made him look like a miniature executive rather than a 15-year-old boy. Next came the clothes. Sneakers that cost $300. Hoodies so limited edition his friends gasped. A watch Nicholas definitely did not buy on his salary. Then came the comments, barbed and echoing with someone else's vocabulary. "Grace says manufacturing is a dying field. Grace says real wealth comes from innovation. Grace says image matters if you want to be taken seriously. Grace says, Grace says, Grace says. Always Grace." "Grace sounds like she has a lot of opinions," I said one evening as we sat on my couch, sorting through engineering club applications for him. Brandon shrugged. "She's actually really smart, Mom. You'd know that if you talked to her instead of being weird around her." Weird. That word hit harder than I expected. I wasn't weird. I was erased. The first time I noticed Brandon looking at my work truck with disdain was subtle. A wrinkle of the nose, the faintest huff of air. "That thing?" he said, sliding into the passenger seat like it offended him. "Grace says people judge your ride before they judge your skill set." "She's welcome to judge my welding contracts," I replied, buckling my seatbelt. They pay better than her pre-IPO equity. He rolled his eyes so hard, I swear he saw the back of his skull. Then came the missed weekends. He canceled twice in a row for important events with Nicholas and Grace. Networking dinners, he explained, stretching the phrase like he knew it impressed people. Her company's doing major things. She wants me to start getting exposed to real business. I was tempted to ask what exactly a 15-year-old contributes to entrepreneurial networking, but I bit my tongue. One missed weekend became 4. One canceled plan became a pattern. The Colorado trip, the one we'd planned for 6 months, with campus tours and hiking maps and hotel reservations, evaporated on a Thursday evening. Grace's company is taking us to Hawaii, he said over the phone. It's a retreat. I can't miss it. We'll do Colorado another time. We never did. I spent the week reorganizing inventory at the warehouse because work doesn't cancel on you, not like people do. But the moment everything snapped, the moment I finally saw how completely they'd carved me out of his life, happened at his school. Parent-teacher night. When I walked into his classroom, the teacher's eyes flickered with confusion. Nicholas and Grace were already seated beside Brandon, leaning in close, smiling warmly, like a postcard family. "Oh," the teacher said, adjusting her glasses. "Are you Brandon's?" Before she could finish, Brandon answered. "She's my biological mother," he said, tone flat, almost bored. "This is my mom, Grace." He pointed at her. Grace didn't correct him. Nicholas didn't blink. My son didn't look at me. The teacher faltered, glancing between us, unsure if she'd just witnessed something inappropriate. I sat through the entire meeting, feeling like a ghost drifting through a scene I used to belong in. Anytime the teacher addressed me, Brandon redirected the conversation toward Grace. Actually, Grace helped me with that project. Grace thinks I should pursue business, not engineering. Grace says entrepreneurship is the future. I walked out of that classroom in a fog, the laughter from other families echoing down the hallway as if mocking me. Outside, I sat in my truck, gripping the steering wheel until my palms ached. Then I picked up my phone and called William Patterson. He answered on the second ring. "Joanna? I need to prepare something," I said quietly. "What kind of something?" "The kind," I whispered, staring at my own reflection in the dark window, "that protects the family name if my son decides he doesn't want it anymore." There was a long silence. Then William exhaled slowly. "All right, let's talk." When Nicholas and Grace married, I expected them to treat Brandon well. I did not expect them to rewire him. I did not expect my son to come home quoting startup jargon he barely understood, calling my life's work small, calling my career obsolete, calling my love clingy. I did not expect him to speak to me like I was a burden. But I should have, because Grace understood something Nicholas never had. Power isn't just taken, it's given, and Brandon was giving her all of his. Piece by piece, year by year, until there wasn't much left for me to hold on to. I used to think emotional manipulation was loud. Slamming doors, screaming fights, dramatic exits. Grace taught me it could be whisper quiet. A suggestion here, a compliment there, a subtle comparison dropped like a seed into the mind of a 15-year-old boy desperate to feel grown. And Grace watered that seed daily. It began with style. Brandon used to be a jeans and hoodie kid. Hair shaggy, shoes scuffed. The kind of boy who'd crawl under a car in the driveway with me because he wanted to see how the transmission talks to the engine. But after Grace, suddenly everything he owned looked like it belonged to an influencer's closet. "Grace says presentation matters," he said, adjusting the sleeve of a jacket that cost more than a mortgage payment in some states. "If you want people to respect you, you have to look successful." "Successful at what?" I asked. He shrugged. "Everything." I should have pushed harder. But when your child is slipping away, you don't want to shove. You want to hold on without him noticing. It never works. The next shift was vocabulary. He started speaking in a dialect that sounded like a TED Talk delivered by someone who hadn't fully digested the material. Grace says manufacturing is outdated. The future is digital scalability. Grace says physical labor caps your potential earnings. Grace says you need a disruptive mindset. Grace says, Grace says, Grace says. I wanted to shake him and say, Grace also says her startup is 6 months from profitability for the 5th year in a row. Instead, I said, and what do you say? He blinked at me like the question confused him. But the true turning point, the moment I realized Grace wasn't just influencing him but replacing me, came on a Sunday evening that still haunts me. We were in my kitchen, making dinner together. Brandon was chopping vegetables, wearing one of my old aprons. For a brief second, it felt like a real moment, like the boy I raised was still in there beneath all the glossy veneer. Nicholas called halfway through. I could hear Grace laughing in the background through the phone. After Brandon hung up, he sighed dramatically. I wish you were more like Grace sometimes. I froze. More like how? You know, confident, visionary. She thinks big. She doesn't stress about stupid things. She understands business better than you do. I set my knife down very carefully. Please say that again, I said. He rolled his eyes. You get emotional about everything, Mom. You don't think strategically. I laughed, a hollow sound that didn't feel like it belonged to me. Brandon, I run a multi-million-dollar manufacturing company. Yeah, he said, but that's old world stuff. Grace says, I didn't let him finish. I turned off the stove, washed my hands, and leaned on the counter so I could look at him directly. Brandon, I said softly, you're being groomed. He looked genuinely offended. I'm being mentored. There's a difference. He scoffed. You're just jealous. That sentence should have destroyed me. It didn't. It calcified me. The next few months were a slow corrosion. He arrived late to weekends with me. Hours late, without apology. He canceled visits because Grace had family events. He ignored my calls but answered Nicholas and Grace instantly. And the worst part? He flaunted it. He'd FaceTime me from their kitchen so I could admire their new marble countertops, or show me the home theater Nicholas financed on a promotional credit card he couldn't afford. Nice, right? Brandon would say, pointing his camera. Grace says this is what a real home looks like. A real home, as opposed to mine. But nothing compared to the parent-teacher conference. I still relive it sometimes like a wound that never quite heals. When Brandon said, that's my biological mother, Grace is my real mom now. The world tilted sideways. The teacher's face went pale. Nicholas stared straight ahead. Grace smiled just enough to show teeth. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drag him out of the room. I wanted to disappear. Instead, I folded my hands and listened as my son gave credit for his projects, grades, and successes to Grace. To Grace, who hadn't even been in his life 3 years earlier. Driving home that night, the road blurred beneath my headlights. My throat hurt. I kept picturing Brandon as a baby, gripping my thumb. Brandon at 6, running into my arms after school. Brandon at 12, telling me he wanted to learn engineering, because machines make more sense than people. How did that boy evaporate? How did he become someone who looked at me and saw inconvenience instead of love? When I finally pulled into my driveway, I didn't go inside. I sat in the truck, hands trembling, and called William Patterson. He answered immediately. He always does for me. William, I said, forcing my voice steady, I need you to prepare something. Joanna, he said slowly, what happened? Brandon happened. I stared at my own reflection in the window. Eyes red, face hollow, a mother who had just been replaced. I need documents drafted, I continued, for the renunciation of the Hartley name. Everything ironclad. No loopholes. If he decides to walk away, I want to be ready. William exhaled heavily. Joanna, this is permanent. I know. You understand what Clause 14.7 means? Yes. And you're willing, he said gently, to let him choose that kind of consequence? I closed my eyes. It won't be me choosing, I whispered. It'll be him. William was silent for a long, long moment. Come to my office tomorrow, he finally said. We'll begin drafting. 3 weeks later, after 7 document revisions and 2 estate attorneys reviewing William's work, the renunciation papers were complete. A simple stack of pages, plain, precise, lethal. On top, the declaration for legally changing one's name. In the middle, a formal acknowledgement of voluntary renunciation. Nowhere, any mention of the family trust or Clause 14.7. It didn't have to. The trust document stands alone. All Brandon had to do was sign, and I prayed, truly prayed, that he wouldn't. But Grace had been whispering in his ear for years, and Nicholas let her. And I had spent too long hoping love alone would anchor my son. So I carried the envelope in my jacket day after day, waiting, preparing, hoping I'd never need it. And then the brunch invitation arrived, from Grace, addressed to me like a formal announcement of war. On the morning of the brunch, as I buttoned my shirt and tied my hair back, I stood in front of the mirror and thought, if he chooses her, if he chooses them, I won't hold on while he walks away. I slipped the envelope into my jacket, just in case. Not because I wanted the moment to come, but because I knew it would. The morning of the brunch was too bright. Arizona sunlight has a way of being unforgiving, exposing every crack, every flaw, every truth you don't want to face. I remember standing in front of my bedroom mirror, straightening a simple blouse, nothing fancy, nothing to compete with Grace Harrison's curated perfection, and telling myself to breathe. Today would be a performance, but not mine. I slipped the envelope into my jacket. Not gently, not dramatically, just placed it there like a seatbelt, like armor, like inevitability. For 6 weeks, that envelope had followed me everywhere: boardrooms, warehouses, coffee shops, parent meetings, sitting silently in my passenger seat like a loaded gun I hoped I'd never reach for. But I knew better. The moment was coming, and I needed to be ready. When I arrived at Riverside Country Club at 11:15 a.m., the parking lot looked like a luxury dealership. Sleek cars gleaming under the sun, the kind of vehicles people lease to feel like they're living a life they can't actually afford. Grace's electric SUV was impossible to miss. Cream-colored, shiny, polished to a mirror, a vanity license plate that made me cringe. I parked my work truck 2 rows back. As I walked inside, I could already hear laughter echoing down the long hallway. Grace's laugh, specifically. Bright, confident, perfectly pitched. A laugh that said, "Look at me, look at us, look at how well we're doing." The hostess led me to the patio, where 23 guests sat at a long white table, all pastel dresses and crisp collars and the soft hum of self-satisfaction. Grace sat at the heads of the table like a queen presiding over her court. Nicholas beside her, shoulders back, smiling too wide, and Brandon sitting between them, leaning toward Grace as she adjusted his suit jacket, the gesture intimate and maternal in a way that twisted something deep in my chest. "Joanna," Nicholas called lightly, as if he hadn't spent years dismantling my family. "You made it." I nodded. "Of course." Brandon gave me a quick, lukewarm smile, the kind you give someone you vaguely recognize from a dentist's waiting room. I took my seat at the opposite end of the table, exactly where they'd placed me. Far enough away that I couldn't reach him, close enough that I had to watch everything. A perfect metaphor for the past 2 years. For an hour, I listened to the Harrison entourage talk about golf scores, private school gossip, their upcoming group trip to Cabo, which contractor was overcharging them for a new outdoor kitchen, how Grace's startup was on the verge of something big. It all blurred together into a soft, smug hum carried on champagne bubbles. I quietly checked emails from my warehouse manager about a supplier issue. I didn't belong here, but that wasn't new. Finally, Grace stood up and tapped her glass. The patio fell silent, air tightening with anticipation. These people lived for announcements that sounded like Instagram captions. "I just want to toast," she said, voice glowing, "to our beautiful family and this exciting new chapter." She squeezed Brandon's shoulder. He straightened under her touch. "Brandon has something important to share," she continued, smiling in that way she does when she's certain she's about to receive applause. Brandon rose to his feet. His hands shook slightly. Nerves, pride, performance anxiety, but his chin was high. "I've been thinking a lot about who I want to be," he began. "The Harrison family has shown me the kind of future I want, a future with innovation, ambition, real success." Someone murmured approvingly. "My mom," he stopped, corrected himself. "Joanna is fine, but she's stuck in old-school manufacturing." My heart clenched. "She doesn't see the bigger picture," another squeeze from Grace. "So," Brandon said, louder now, "I've decided I don't want the Hartley name anymore. I'm changing my last name to Harrison, legally, starting today." A low ripple spread across the table. Grace lifted her glass first. "To Brandon Harrison, may he have the legacy he truly deserves." People raised their glasses. The world slowed. My pulse didn't spike. My hands didn't tremble. I didn't gasp or break or scream. I just felt tired, so profoundly tired that my bones ached. And then something inside me settled. A quiet, devastated acceptance. This was his choice. He'd made it long before this moment. Today was only the performance. I stood up. Chairs shifted. People watched me the way people watch a dog near a Thanksgiving table. Nervous, unsure if it will bark or bite. I walked the length of the table, my jacket heavier with every step. Brandon stared at me, jaw tight. "Here," I said softly, placing the envelope in front of him. "If you're serious, sign." The words sliced through the warm brunch air like a cold wind. "What is this?" he asked. "A legal name change and formal renunciation of the Hartley family name." Nicholas's face paled. Grace leaned forward sharply. A few relatives exchanged confused looks. Brandon swallowed. "You had this ready?" "Yes." Honesty tasted bitter. "For how long?" he demanded. "Long enough," I said quietly, to know this moment was coming. He opened the envelope. The crisp paper fluttered, catching the sunlight. "This is ridiculous," Grace said, voice sharp. "Joanna, you're making this—" "This is a legal decision," I interrupted. It deserves a legal process. If he wants to leave the Hartley name behind, he should understand what he's doing. Brandon stiffened. I do understand. Then read it, I said, before you sign anything. He skimmed the first 3 sentences, barely looked at the rest, and picked up the pen. Brandon, I said softly, one last attempt. This is permanent. I know what I want, he snapped. He didn't read another word. His signature slashed across the page, angry and triumphant and heartbreakingly young. There, he said, done. I looked at his name, Brandon Hartley, sitting above the line where he'd severed it. I placed the papers back in the envelope, slid it into my jacket, and raised my orange juice. To Brandon, I said, may you get exactly what you just asked for. A hush fell over the patio. I turned, walked out into the sunlight, climbed into my truck, and drove straight to William Patterson's office. He was waiting. Joanna, he said as I entered, tell me you're not here because I set the envelope on his desk. He opened it. He looked at the signature. He closed his eyes. Well, he whispered, then Clause 14.7 is officially in effect. Brandon had no idea that he'd just detonated the bridge behind him, and the fire hadn't even reached him yet. The thing about consequences, real ones, is that they don't explode immediately. They creep. They seep into the cracks of a life built on performance and borrowed stability. They reveal what was hollow all along. And on Monday morning at 8:03 a.m., the first domino fell. 8:03 a.m., Hartley Legacy Scholarship Fund. Every direct Hartley descendant is automatically enrolled in the family scholarship system the moment they enter high school. For Brandon, it covered nearly $1,600 per semester of private school tuition. But Clause 14.7 is coded into the trust's internal system. The moment William's office logged Brandon's signed renunciation, access revoked name, removed from beneficiary list, balance forfeited, just like that. Somewhere in the school finance office, a blinking notification appeared. Brandon Hartley, now Brandon Harrison, no longer qualifies for Hartley Endowment assistance. They didn't call me. They called Nicholas and Grace. 9:14 a.m. Tuition shock. Grace's phone buzzed with a call from Canyon Ridge Preparatory School. She answered cheerfully. She always performed cheerfully, until the administrator explained that their son's tuition was now $20,800 due immediately for the spring semester. Her smile froze. Nicholas paled. Brandon looked up from his cereal, confused. But it's covered by the scholarship, Nicholas said. Not anymore, the administrator replied. The scholarship was tied to the Hartley name. Grace's voice sharpened. There must be a mistake. We'll sort it out. But there was no mistake. Nothing tied to the Hartley legacy survives without the Hartley name. 10:27 a.m. health insurance. At my company, I had quietly been covering Brandon on a premium family plan. Not required under the divorce decree, just something I kept doing because he was my son. After the renunciation, my HR department flagged the coverage. William's assistant sent me a message. Per legal requirements, Brandon is no longer eligible under company family coverage. Removal processed. Nicholas and Grace's insurance policy was high deductible, bare minimum coverage. Brandon didn't know that yet. He would. 11:52 p.m. The car that would never be his. The 2020 Honda Civic I'd spent 2 years restoring for Brandon's 17th birthday sat in the company warehouse, polished and gleaming. I stood beside it, my hand on the hood, heart twisting. It had been our project, our dream, our bridge back to each other. He'd thrown the bridge into the fire. So I made a decision. I donated the car to a trade school's automotive program. Let underprivileged kids learn from it, repair it, use it to build futures Brandon no longer wanted. Oh, I didn't tell him. I didn't need to. Tuesday afternoon, the call. Grace tried calling me 6 times. Yes, Nicole is now Nicholas. Grace is ex-wife equivalent. This is correct after gender swap. Calls I did not answer. Voicemail. 1. Confused. Joanna, hey. There's something strange with the scholarship. Can you call me? Voicemail 2. Annoyed. Why would the trust suddenly revoke everything? What did you do? Voicemail 3. Angry. You can't financially punish a child. This is illegal. Voicemail. Emotional. Please, just call us back. We need to sort this out. Brandon is upset. Voicemail 5. Sobbing. He's scared. He doesn't understand. I don't understand. Voicemail 6. Venom. You're cruel. You're jealous. You're punishing all of us. You will regret this. Delete, delete, delete. I stared at my phone for a long moment afterward, chest tight but steady. This wasn't punishment. This was protection of the trust, of the legacy, of the boundaries I should have enforced years ago. He renounced the name. The trust renounced him back. Wednesday, McCourt. Nicholas filed an emergency motion for custody modification, accusing me of financial abuse. The judge, a woman in her 60s, who had clearly endured decades of custody theatrics, listened to Nicholas's lawyer drone on about maternal vindictiveness and intentional destabilization. Then my lawyer stood and calmly laid everything out. The renunciation document Brandon signed, video recordings from multiple witnesses, screenshots of posts from that brunch circulating online, text evidence showing. I explicitly told Brandon to read the document, the trust language predating even my existence, clearly outlining Clause 14.7. When the judge finished reading, she removed her glasses, pinched the bridge of her nose, and sighed long and deep. "Counselor," she said to Nicholas's attorney, "your client's son made an autonomous legal decision. He signed a binding document at 16, fully within state law, after being explicitly warned to read it. There is no abuse here, only consequences." Nicholas sputtered. Grace looked like she'd swallowed her tongue. The judge raised a hand for silence. "If he is mature enough," she said firmly, "to announce publicly that he no longer wants his mother's name, he is mature enough to face the legal ramifications of that announcement." Bang, motion denied. Grace stormed out. Nicholas followed. Brandon didn't look back at me once. Thursday night. The call I expected. At 11:47 p.m., my phone vibrated. A message from Brandon. "Mom, what happened to my scholarship? Why is everything saying my name is removed? Please answer." For a long time, I stared at the screen, thumb hovering. Then I typed, "You signed a legal document, Brandon. Actions have consequences." He called immediately. I let it ring. Twice. 3 times. Then I answered. His voice cracked. "Mom, I thought it was just a name change. I didn't know." "I told you to read it." "You didn't tell me it would affect everything." "You didn't ask." Silence, a shuddering breath. "I made a mistake." I closed my eyes. "Yes," I said, "you did. Can you fix it?" "No." "Why not?" "Because you meant it that day, and I respected your choice." "But I didn't know what I was signing." "And whose fault is that?" He broke then. The kind of raw, panicked, lost cry I hadn't heard since he was small. "Mom, I'm sorry, please, I'm your son." "You told me I wasn't," I said softly. "You told a room full of strangers Grace was your real mom." He didn't speak. "Go ask Grace to fix this," I said. "She likes being the parent. Let her handle it." Then I hung up. The ache in my chest pulsed like a bruise. But beneath it, there was something solid. A line that had finally been drawn. Friday morning. Grace's collapse. At 9:30 a.m., a tow truck arrived outside Nicholas and Grace's house. Brandon watched from their driveway as the sleek electric SUV, Grace's precious status symbol, was hooked, lifted, and pulled away. Funding for her startup had fallen through. Investors discovered the company had burned $12 million with no path to profitability. Lease defaults followed. Credit cards maxed out. Grace had been living on borrowed hype. The creditors had arrived to collect. Brandon texted me at 10:02 a.m. "They took Grace's car. Everything is falling apart. Mom, please help." I put my phone face down on my desk and returned to reviewing supplier invoices. Some lessons must be lived, not taught. The fallout was only beginning. But Brandon Harrison, formerly Hartley, had already felt the first tremors of the earthquake he created with one reckless signature. And the real collapse hadn't even started yet. By week 3, the earthquake had reached full rupture. Nicholas and Grace's household was collapsing in real time, and Brandon, caught in the middle, was only just beginning to understand the cost of trying to trade a legacy for a lifestyle. But he hadn't seen the full wreckage yet. That moment was still coming. And when it arrived, it would happen in front of nearly 40 members of my extended family. The family gathering. Every April, my Uncle Richard hosts a massive cookout at his ranch outside Tucson. Horses grazing behind the fencing, cousins chasing footballs across the yard. The kind of open-air gathering where the smell of mesquite and grilled meat hangs in the air for hours. It's one of the few traditions that survived every generation of Hartleys. This year, Brandon came with Nicholas. Grace stayed home. She'd been too overwhelmed to attend. The truth, I suspect, was simpler. She didn't want to face a crowd she could no longer impress. Nicholas and Brandon walked onto the ranch lawn together. Nicholas looked worn, heavier in the face, the edges of his stress finally showing. Brandon looked small, smaller than I'd seen him in years. He wore regular jeans, a wrinkled t-shirt, and sneakers that weren't designer. He looked like someone trying desperately to blend into a world he no longer belonged to. The whispers started immediately. Isn't that Joanna's boy? I thought he changed his name. Poor kid. What a mess. Nobody was cruel to him, but nobody embraced him either. He'd cut himself loose from the family tree. People weren't sure if he was still allowed to climb back onto a branch. I didn't walk over to him. I didn't smile. I didn't glare. I simply existed near him the way he had taught himself to exist near me. Distant, polite, not reaching. Let him feel it now. Let him see what it meant to choose absence. The courier arrives. Around 3:40 p.m., as cousins refilled lemonade pitchers and my aunt passed out slices of peach pie, a white courier van rumbled down the dirt driveway. We all turned as a uniformed man climbed out, holding a large sealed manila envelope. I'm looking for... He squinted at the name. A Brandon Harrison? The entire ranch went silent. Every Hartley head turned. Brandon froze, slice of pie halfway to his mouth. His face went pale. That's me, he said hesitantly. The courier handed him the envelope. Need you to sign showing delivery. Brandon scribbled his name on the scanner. Then he stared at the envelope like it might detonate in his hands. Somebody murmured, "Open it, son." He did. His hands shook as he pulled out the first page, a cover letter printed on official Hartley Family Trust letterhead. I didn't move closer. I didn't help him. I didn't rescue him. He had walked into this fire on his own. He could walk through the smoke. His eyes scanned the page. Confusion, shock, fear, recognition. He flipped to the second page. His lips parted. Everyone watched him crumble silently as he read line after line, each one slicing through whatever illusions he still carried. Revocation of beneficiary status. Brandon Harrison. Formerly, Brandon Hartley. Itemized list. Hartley legacy. Scholarship fund. Revoked value. Forfeited. $86,400. Canyon Ridge Preparatory Tuition Endowment. Revoked. $32,400 annually. Health coverage. Terminated. Vehicle allocation, 2020 Honda Civic. Reassigned/donated. Seed investment fund. Revoked, $25,000. Primary beneficiary of Hartley Family Trust. Revoked value, forfeited. $2,317,500. Future ownership. Stake in Hartley Industrial Supply. Revoked. Estimated value. $4,200,000. Total value forfeited. $7,511,300. By the time he reached the last number, Brandon's face had drained of all color. His knees actually buckled. My uncle grabbed a chair. Brandon collapsed into it, staring at the pages as if hoping the ink might rearrange itself into something gentler. It didn't. It never would. You can't undo a name you cast away. The crack in Nicholas's mask. Nicholas snatched the papers from Brandon's shaking hands and skimmed them, face tightening with each line. This is insane, he snapped, voice too loud. She can't do this. Joanna can't. I turned my head slightly, meeting his eyes across the gathering. It wasn't me, I said quietly. It was the trust my father built, the trust your son renounced. He shut his mouth. Grace wasn't there to argue. Nicholas didn't have her firepower, her arrogance, her talent for social performance. Without her, he looked like a man who'd finally realized how badly he'd miscalculated. Brandon's hands were trembling as he whispered, I didn't know it would do all this. A few family members shifted uncomfortably. Someone said softly, You should have read what you signed, boy. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The truth was sitting in his lap, itemized in brutal black ink. The House of Cards falls. That night, Nicholas drove Brandon home in silence. Grace was at the kitchen table scrolling through her phone, expression tight. The remains of takeout containers were spread out in front of her, the remnants of a life unraveling. Brandon sat across from her, still shaking. Grace looked up. Well, she asked flatly, did you finally get the trust's little hate mail? Brandon's voice cracked. You said changing my name was a good idea. Grace lifted an eyebrow. I said do what you think is best. No, Brandon whispered. You told me I should. I said if you want to. Big difference. Nicholas watched silently. Brandon looked between them, tears streaking down his face. You said you'd treat me like your own son. I did, Grace said, standing and collecting the plates. But come on, Brandon. You're not my responsibility. The sentence hit him like a blow. What? Grace shrugged. Your little family feud isn't my business. You made your choice. Your mother made hers. That's between you two. Brandon stared at her, realization dawning. exploding inside him. Grace liked having him. She liked the image, the symbolism, the attention. But support, burden, consequences? She had no interest in carrying him through those. Nicholas didn't defend him. Nicholas didn't fight for him. Nicholas didn't even touch his shoulder. The boy who had proudly declared Grace as my real mom at a parent-teacher conference now saw exactly what she thought of him. A prop, a convenient accessory, not family. Not truly. The final break. 2 months later, Brandon turned 17. My child support obligation ended the moment the clock struck midnight. That afternoon, Nicholas called me, desperate, frantic. "Joanna, please," he begged. "We need the support for 1 more year, just until graduation, just until things stabilize." "No," I said calmly. "But we're drowning. Grace's company is gone. We had to sell the house. Brandon's school is demanding payment." "That," I said softly, "is your life now. You all chose it." He swallowed. "Brandon made a mistake." "Yes," I replied, "and now he knows what one mistake can cost." "Joanna," he whispered, voice breaking. "Please. He's still our son." I closed my eyes. "He told the world I wasn't his mother," I said. "You both encouraged it. Live with it." I hung up. They lost the house in September, moved into a cramped townhouse. Brandon transferred to a public high school mid-semester. Grace's bankruptcy filing hit the local business news. Nicholas's credit collapsed. Everything Brandon had tied himself to, the image, the glamour, the Harrison lifestyle, had evaporated. And everything he'd thrown away, legacy, stability, opportunity, generational wealth, remained locked behind a door he could never open again. The email. In November, he sent it. A long, aching email. "Mom, I understand now. I see what I did. I see how stupid I was. I'm sorry. Please let me fix this. Please tell me how. I want to be your son again." I read it 3 times. Then I typed 1 sentence. Only one. "You're a Harrison now. Harrisons figure things out on their own." And I hit send. I sat back in my chair, the ache in my chest sharp but clean. You can love someone fiercely. You can give them everything. You can break yourself trying to keep them safe. But sometimes the most powerful act of love is stepping back, letting their choices hurt them, letting the fire teach them what your warnings couldn't, and letting the bridge they burned stay burned.